Okay, perfect. All right. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you so much for everybody who's logged on. Today we're going to be doing a workshop over medical school interviews. And this workshop is hosted by AMWPA. So let's get started. Before we begin, I'm just going to start with a quick surah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق خلق الإنسان من علق اقرأ وربك الأكرم الذي علم بالقلم علم الإنسان ما لم يعلم. So what is AMWPA? AMWPA is a nonprofit organization that was founded in 2008, and it consists of a group of female Muslim physicians and dentists who are allied in health promotion and preventative medicine in the community. And our vision is to promote the health, welfare, and education of women. And they were very active during the pandemic in educating the community and providing masks throughout the Metroplex. And they also provided meals for frontline workers and offered merit scholarships to Muslim female students in medicine. So our panelists today, I don't know why Dr. Sayed's picture is not here, but I'm gonna have everybody introduce themselves. I'm HEBA, I'm a UT Southwestern MS2, and I'm gonna be the moderator. And everybody else can feel free to introduce themselves as well.
So, assalamu alaikum, everybody. I promise you, I did have a picture there. There it is.
There
My name is ZUBAIR. I am an associate professor and a residency program director at UT Southwestern. I've been program director for the family medicine department for almost 9 years now. And in my role, obviously, I do more residency interviews than I do med school interviews. But over the last 3 to 4 years, I have been associated with doing the medical school interviews for UT Southwestern as well. So happy to be here, and hopefully you'll all learn from all the other panelists that are here, and we're here to answer your questions.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Mohammad Jamadi. I'm an MS1 at UTMB. I graduated from UTD with a major in neuroscience, and I'm a little bit closer to the process than maybe some of the other panelists. So hopefully I'll have some advice for you guys, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Sophia. I'm a current fourth year at DELL Med School. I graduated from the University of Houston and also grew up in Houston and moved to Austin for school. I'm actually about to go through the residency application process right now, so I will be interviewing. So maybe I can also gain some benefit from this panel as well as provide advice.
Great. Okay, so congrats on your interview if you have been invited, for one. And the purpose of this workshop, again, is to kind of prepare you for that. So we're trying to answer the question, now what? There'll be 3 different topics we're going to be discussing today, and that includes before your interview, during your interview, after your interview, and then at the very end, we're going to open it up to advice from the expert panelists and allow you to ask any questions that you may have. And also, we'll be opening up a Google form at the end of this workshop so that if you are interested in signing up for a mock interview, you are able to, and we have some medical students as well as attendings and residents and fellows who have volunteered their time to give you a mock interview if that's something you're interested in. So stay tuned until the end so that we can share that Google form with you.
So before your interview, we go on to the next slide. The first thing you should know is, alhamdulillah, if you got an interview, that is incredibly amazing. Most medical schools only offer interviews to like 15% of the students who apply. So just getting an interview is already putting you in an amazing position, especially in Texas, because we do the ranking system. So just by getting an interview, you already have a shot at getting accepted. That doesn't require you, or it doesn't always require you to have to go through a wait list in case you don't get in through that first wave. So one of the great ways to prepare for your interview is by reading this book, the Pre-Med Playbook by Dr. Ryan Gray. I think most everyone here knows who Dr. Ryan Gray is. If you don't, I definitely suggest you YouTube him. He has an incredible series called Application Renovation. This is more for these before the interview phase, but he tells you some of the tactics that have gotten medical students accepted into medical school, some of the aspects of their application or interview that might have caused them to not get accepted. And this book basically focuses on that interview part. It tells you some tricks and tips on how to really impress your interviewers during your interview. So definitely recommend reading this book before you walk into your interview. So after reading this book and before your interview, research the school you're going to be interviewing at. Every school has unique features, unique stuff about them. And showing that you know those unique aspects of that school really tells the interviewer that you're interested in that particular school. So avoid giving like generic answers. Like, for example, if they ask you maybe, why do you want to go to UTMB? Well, yeah, it's a medical school and that's probably the reason you want to go. But maybe something more specific, like for example, at UTMB, I know that our health simulation center is the newest and biggest in the country. So saying something like that and mentioning it and maybe talking about aspects of their curriculum. For example, UTMB's curriculum is very NBME based, so it follows the boards when making in-house exams. So mentioning stuff like that and how it's conducive to your learning experience at a medical school and how it's unique at UTMB, for example, will definitely give you a boost in your during your interview. And the same goes for other medical schools. I'm sure HEBA and Sophia could tell you some of the unique stuff about UT Southwestern and DELL Medical School, respectively. And mentioning that during your interview will really, really help. A lot of these schools also have core competencies that's required for every student to achieve as a requisite of graduation. And just being aware of that, being aware of some of the core values of the school and mentioning it, but maybe a little bit indirectly. For example, if one of the core competencies is just treating the patient rather than the disease or anything of that sort, then maybe talk about an experience where you had to speak to a person who's sick, like based on their own personal problems and how that illness is affecting them and their personal life, rather than focusing just entirely on the disease and the pathology of it. Everything you submitted in your application is fair game during the interview. And I can speak from experience that they will grill you on stuff like research. So definitely know the ins and outs of your research. They won't just ask you, at least on the research part, about the research, but why you didn't do particular stuff as a part of your research. Maybe why you didn't do a particular experiment or why you didn't do a particular test. They will ask you, they will ask you every aspect of your research. So if you did research, make sure you know it in and out. Know the purpose of your research, the big picture of it, not just the nitty-gritties as well. Your extracurriculars as well, know why you did every single extracurricular that you did. For example, you volunteered at a hospital. Okay, you volunteered at the hospital, but what did you gain from that? What was that experience like? Talk about the experience rather than just what you did volunteering at that hospital. Yeah, so you don't want to get caught off guard by something that you wrote yourself in your application. So just really, really know everything that you submitted. I know it might be some time before your initial submission, which probably was maybe in June, and your interview invite, which was probably around now. So don't think that you might remember everything. It would still be a good idea just to give a quick review of a quick read of your own application before your interview. It's also good to be cognizant of the world around you, know about healthcare policy changes and major topics in healthcare. I know in my interview at some schools, they did ask about current events, healthcare issues. So just being aware of everything would definitely help. You don't have to be an expert, but just knowing what's going on is very good. And this one is a really good piece of advice that I really think would help. Look up your interviewers before your actual interview. I think most Texas schools, if I remember correctly, did provide you the name of your interviewers, unless it was an MMI, which we'll talk about later. So Google them, find out some of their research interests, find out where they study, what they studied, and this will give you some common ground to speak with them during the actual interview. So this could actually like really make your interview if you really can click with your interviewer just by talking about common research or common interests and stuff. That'll be like golden. And also have thoughtful questions at the end about the school or about the interviewer. It doesn't have to be like something like out of this world, but maybe just some reflections that you've already had during your extracurriculars, and maybe ask your interviewer about maybe how to deal with, let's say you see a patient crying in the hospital, you could kind of give a thoughtful reflection about how that experience was, and maybe ask your interviewer if he's had previous experiences like that, and if he has any advice or anything that can kind of put you at a common ground with your interviewer. Yeah, look up the most commonly asked interview questions. This will all be present in that book. He has like 50 or 60 common interview questions, and practice. A lot of undergrad schools, I know UTD, for example, has a healthcare professions office, which will actually give you like mock interviews for free. And these are all doctors or PhD doctors, and even some actual doctors come and volunteer for this. So they will know exactly what questions to ask. I think this is especially useful if your application was research heavy. So a lot of these PhDs will know exactly what kind of questions the faculty will ask you during your interview. So also figure out what type of interview it is. An open file interview is where the interviewer can actually see your application throughout your interview. So he will or she will go through every single aspect of what you put in and ask pointed questions about different experiences you mentioned in your application. So this is a lot more formal. Just know your place, I guess, during the interview, a little bit less jokey and stuff. So yeah, just know that open file interviews are where knowing every aspect of your application is the most important. That's where you really want to have the ins and outs of your application down. A closed file interview is a lot more, I don't know if fun is the right word, but it's a lot more conversational. They'll be more interested in the personal statement aspect of your application than anything else. Your experiences and kind of your life story leading up to this interview invite. So they won't know your MCAT score, they won't know your GPA, they won't know much of anything besides the fact that you got an interview here. So it'll also be a good idea to introduce some aspects of your application that you'd like to talk about, that you think are stronger aspects of you as an applicant. So that gives you some leeway in like what you want to talk about during the interview. You could kind of lead a conversation in this sort of an interview. An MMI, which I think it is an interview method that both UTMB and DELL uses. I think Sophia can also talk about that later maybe, but it's a lot more faster paced. You only get like 3 or 4 minutes maximum with your interviewer. You're gonna have like 5 or 6 interviewers, and they will ask you a lot of Casper-like questions. I know I had a lot of those kind of questions. So also getting from, yeah, I mean, you'll probably already know how to answer these because you'll have taken Casper to apply to medical school. Other than that, you'll have multiple chances to prove yourself. So don't worry too much if maybe you felt like you didn't get to talk about everything you wanted to during your first or second or third multiple mini interview, because there will be other chances. At UTMB, for example, I think the last multiple mini interview is an open one. So you can lead the conversation. You could just tell the interviewer, kind of sell yourself an elevator pitch. So that one is a lot more different than the other two, but there are ways to prepare for that too. And you'll also find that in that book by Dr. Ryan Gray. There are also panel and group interviews. These aren't as common in Texas from my experience, but a panel interview is where maybe a panel of doctors are going to, or a panel of faculty members are each going to be talking with you and ask you different questions about your application. Whereas a group interview is where you and several of your fellow applicants will be in the same group, and you'll all be being interviewed at the same time. Sometimes this will be like, they'll give you like a project or something, a really quick one, maybe like 4 or 5 minutes. I know Dell does this, where they'll ask you to do like a team assignment, and they'll be evaluating how each member of that group contributed to the completion of that mini assignment. So that one is also not as common, but I know for sure that Dell does that. So if you do get an interview from them, you should definitely read up on that aspect of group interviews from in that book by Dr. Ryan Gray. And I think Dr. Syed will take it from here.
All right, so I'm going to talk for a few minutes about what we expect at the other end when you are actually coming in for an interview. So let's go to the next slide, HEBA. It's a really true statement. Being different is better than being better than everybody else. There's so much of competition nowadays. The fact that you've actually gotten a medical school interview doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get an invite at the end, or you're going to get an okay at the end. So you really have to be outperforming pretty much everybody else when you're there at an interview. So being different is really better than being better than everybody else. So just keep that in mind. There has to be something unique about you in the interview process that makes you be remembered to the interview committee when they're talking about you at the end. Next slide. Different over the last 3 years, it's a slightly different thing. A couple of years we've had virtual interviews. So basically things have changed quite a bit along with that. Med schools are still offering virtual interviews. And so think of that in that aspect as well. But if you are going to have an interview in person, which is where most of us are going now, obviously it's very simple. Dress professionally. Men, you got to have a suit, neutral shirt and a tie, wear comfortable shoes. There may be, if it's an in-person interview, you may be walking around the medical school. So you want to be comfortable while you're doing that. Early is on time. Make sure that you know where you're going. Double check when you're going to be there, what time, where to park. Plan to be there at least 30 minutes before, and then just sort of plan this through like you're doing an actual job interview, because in reality, this is really what it is. Basic simple etiquette, make sure your phone's turned off if you're having it in the interview room, and be prepared. Bring a portfolio, a notebook, a pen. Be prepared to jot down comments or questions that you may have, and be prepared to ask those questions also. There's usually snacks and stuff available if you're doing this in person, but obviously in a virtual format, that's not an issue. But if you are doing a virtual interview, make sure that your background is appropriate. Make sure that you have, you're dressed professionally in that sense. And so just some of the normal logistical things that we are looking at from our end. Next slide. Okay, this is important. Be yourself, be passionate, be genuine, be positive. All of you have gotten an interview, right? So what we're really looking for at this stage is how you interact, how you come across. Are you really, what is it that you're really looking for? And I'll go back to what Mohammad said in his talk earlier. Know your audience in that sense. If you don't know what kind of a medical school or what the medical school ethics are, what their goals are, it's gonna be very obvious when you're actually interviewing somebody or if you're being interviewed by a faculty member from that particular med school. So know the background, know what you're actually doing, be yourself, be passionate, be genuine, and be positive. This is your opportunity for admissions to learn more about you as a person, right? We have all your data. We have all of your applications. So this is for you. This is the time for you to shine. Remember, just as you are looking to be a med student, we are looking for you to be part of the medical school, essentially. So the fourth point is actually very important. You were offered an interview for a reason. your scores, your application was good enough that you are there for a particular reason. So don't hold back in that context, that your grades may not be the best as everybody else. We're looking for students, we're looking for applicants that are there in totality, not just because of their MCAT scores, but everything else as a person overall. And it's your chance to make admissions believe you belong where you're interviewing. So again, this goes back to really doing your research about the place that you're interviewing at for that particular day. Next slide, Eva. You'll see all of these questions in the book as well, but you got to be able to talk about yourself. What do you like doing? One of the basic questions ends up being, even though we have your personal statement and everything else, one of the basic questions is what's number one on the bulleted list. Tell us about yourself. And that creates a base for further questions to happen. Want to have a sense of why you went into medicine? How would you do as a medical student? Med school is tough. I mean, keep in mind, this is not high school, this is not college. Suddenly you are in a group of people that is just as, if not smarter than you are, and it's a completely different way. And all the students here will maybe attest to this. When it's completely different from being in college as compared to being in med school, in terms of the way that you have to read, in terms of the way that you actually approach things in that sense. So we want to know from our end, how will you actually go through the rigors of med school, and are you able to do that? Why do you want to go into medicine in the first place? Tell us about any extracurricular activities and what you learned from it. This is huge in that sense. We're not only looking at the medicine side of it or the learning side of it, we're also looking at what else have you done that you bring to a medical school, to bring to a campus as such. Some of the other questions you need to be prepared for. What are the biggest challenges you faced? Be genuine about that question, right? It has to be something that you have gone through and you have sort of made yourself impactful, and that has created an impact on you. What is one patient interaction that you found meaningful or has impacted you? You may have that. You may have had a patient interaction. You may not have had a patient interaction, and that's okay. It's absolutely okay to say I've never had a patient interaction. That can we mute people? Thank you. And this is important. Tell me about a time where you worked in a team towards accomplishing a common goal. This may come across in a different way. This may also come across as how well do you work in a team, basically. And so what we're really looking for is how well do you work in a group setting. Not whether you accomplished a goal, but whether you actually worked in a team, and how did a conflict or an unexpected situation arise, whether you were working in that team or not, and how you actually went through that particular situation. Questions about politics, policy, and healthcare. As Mohammad said, if it is there on your application, it can be asked about. Primarily most med schools may not, most interviewers will probably not want to go more into like really controversial politics as such. You want to keep it pretty even-handed in that sense, but they will probably ask about policy and healthcare related policy that you may want to have some sense about. And then this is also important. Think of impactful scenarios that you've experienced so that you can reference them when answering different questions. Think back, think about times that really made you think, okay, this is why I really want to go into med school and I want to become a physician. And then work it in your mind as to how you're going to present that to the interviewer. The way you present a very impactful experience makes a huge difference. I cannot tell you the number of times, and I'm talking about not only the med school piece, but after that, when you're actually applying for a residency. The number of times an applicant looks amazing on paper, but they completely mess it up, blow it up when you're interviewing. And when we sit together as an interview panel and sort of go through each and every applicant at the end of the day, we're like, yeah, this really wasn't as impactful as we thought it was going to be. So plan these scenarios in your end, plan how you're going to actually talk about different things before you are actually, you actually do that. Give me 1 second. My screen completely went blank. Sorry. HEBA, I'll have to disconnect. My screen went blank. I'm sorry. Can you hear
No
me?
worries.
Maybe you can go through the rest of the slides. I really apologize. I don't know what happened here.
No, that's totally fine. Yeah, I can go ahead and take over.
Connect and disconnect.
Okay, so if you don't have the knowledge to answer a question, just make sure to say so. You don't want to act like you know and then kind of get burned at the very, during the interview whenever you say that you know something and you don't really know. And it might be a test to see if you can admit that you don't know everything. So if you get asked a question and you really don't know how to answer it, just say, I don't really know how to answer this question, but I'll definitely look into it and learn more about it if it's something that's objective that you can kind of look up.
All right, I'm back, so I can.
Okay. Great.
Thank you. Sorry, apologies about that. Okay, so exactly, like if you don't know an answer to a question, just say so. It's absolutely okay to say I don't know, but I'll look into it and I'll get back to you. So exactly, it might be a test to see if you're willing to admit not knowing. Next slide. Common mistakes to avoid. Like I said earlier, don't rehearse your answers. Plan them in your mind, have a conversation with them, with family and friends. Do not be scripted. It's very easy for your interviewers to sort of figure out these are very scripted answers. And, once you do these often enough, it's very easy to pick it up as such. Don't be so eager to answer that you answer too quickly or interrupt the interviewer. We are all guilty of this as such. You have to give the other person the time to answer, not only to answer, but also you have to give the other person, you have to expect that the other person gives you the same courtesy and does not interrupt you while you're speaking. So keep that in mind. It's not just a one-sided street at that point. Be aware of rambling or going off topic. You were there for a medical school interview. You have researched the school. You've researched the person. You know what some of the questions, the expected questions are going to be. Don't go off topic. Focus and answer clearly. And be positive. I do not say negative comments about anything as such. There is nothing worse in an interview with many different faculty that you start talking negative stuff about pretty much anything that there is. This is not the time to bring things up at that point. So be positive. That's extremely important. Next slide. Not smiling, be happy, and don't be scared to smile or have a professional sense of humor. And it's absolutely okay. You can make jokes depending on what the situation is at that point and what you are what you're talking about as such. And if it's something that's professionally funny in that sense, it's not like vulgar, obviously, you can absolutely go ahead and interject that into the conversation. Try to avoid filler words that can be distracting. I do this all the time. We all do this. We all say, if you can, try to record yourself during a mock interview. It's very enlightening, for lack of a better word, when you actually record yourself during an interview to actually see how smoothly you're really talking. And so try to avoid any filler words. Have something that you want to have it at the back of your mind that you want to, okay, if there's a gap, I'm going to say this, and this. Saying no to, do you have any questions? Be prepared with questions. We expect questions as such. And, it may be the same questions that the 5 previous applicants have asked us, but we're still prepared to answer any questions. So if you don't have any questions, either you literally have, either you've done so good of a homework that you really don't have any questions at all, or you're really not interested, essentially, in that sense. A majority of the time, it's the latter that comes across in that scenario. And there's no point arguing with an interviewer. We're not here to, do a verbal back and forth. We're here to get to know you. We're here to see whether you're going to be a good fit for what we have to offer in a med school. So there's no point arguing with an interviewer. Just leave it blank and say, I respect your opinions, and I hope that you respect my opinions as well. And that's it. And just move on from there. And obviously, not being prepared. That's sort of the gist of it. One of the things I tell MS 3s and 4s that are going into interview season for residency is know what you're really looking for in a residency program. And this sort of does translate back into the med school piece also. You may have a specific interest, and so every different program and every different med school will have a common curriculum, but they will also have special niches that they are well known for or they do really well. And so you want to have, kind of think of it in that sense. I want to have a must-have criteria for myself. I want to have a absolutely must not have criteria for myself, and write these down. And then in the middle, just have something that yes, I'm willing to negotiate on this, whether a med school offers this or a med school doesn't offer this. And that is something I have a little bit of flexibility over. And once you have that, it makes things much easier, both at a med school level and at a residency interview level, for you to be able to figure out, do I really want to go here versus do I want to go here? This is what happened in my interview here, and this is what I really liked about this place versus this didn't feel so good, and this didn't feel as well. I didn't get a good vibe from that. So these are some of the things to sort of think through when you're prepping for this and we're actually doing the interview as well. Next slide. Yep, and I think HEBA, who's?
Now it's Sophia's part. So
Sophia's gonna do it.
Hey, assalamualaikum. Jazakallah khair to with my fellow panelists. I have the easy job of just talking about what to do after the interview. But before I start, I want to touch on some of the things that were raised. And like I said, a lot of the information that both Mohammad and Dr. Syed said will come up and is something that I encountered when I personally interviewed for medical school. One of the, as far as the healthcare solution, like I definitely 100% agree with that. I would also add to also be aware of a possible solution to the healthcare issue that you talked about. I was caught off guard, like in my first interview, where he asked me, like, what do you think is the biggest issue in healthcare? I had that answer prepared, but then he asked, what would be your solution? I did not have the answer prepared. This is one tip. The second thing, specific interviews for DELL. For the MMI, I would just say there's a website called Reddit that has a lot of helpful advice for how to succeed in the MMIs. I would say go to that if whenever you interview at a school, but that does an MMI format. And the third thing about the group interview that DELL does, it's actually like a group activity where you are tasked with like solving a problem with your interview group. The actual problem is not going to be complex. It's something that you would definitely be able to do. What DELL wants to see and what every med school will want to see is, can you work well within a team? Can you have the ability to lead a conversation at times during the activity, but also step back and take in everyone else's views as well. And that is really what they want to see. Okay, now I'll be talking about the post-interview. So it's very important to send thank you notes to your interviews. I was actually just rotating at the cardiovascular ICU this past week, and one of the attendings was specifically mentioning that anytime, he was emphasizing the importance of it. And sometimes when you don't send a thank you note, it can be noticed. So both for medical school, residency, definitely send a thank you note interview. In your email, don't keep it generic. I always like to a format where, like, first I would thank them for their time, and then I would go into 1 to 3 things that I learned about in the interview or that I really enjoyed talking about. Because it could, so like I said, it could be something that you enjoyed talking about with the interview. It could be something that an interviewer offered you an insight on something that you will remember forever, and that did happen at my interview at the Southwestern. Actually, one of the interviewers said something that I still remember to this day. And the being specific, it's will also make the email and the thank you note more meaningful and will make you more memorable. Also, it's important, especially I think in the online format now, to send it the same day as your interview. Many of the interviews, I think for residency at least, complete or end by noon. So you do theoretically have some time during the afternoon. It was a little bit different whenever I was interviewing and I had to travel and everything in the afternoon. I would just send them the next day. But I think it's very sound advice to send it as the same day. And then after we covered the thank you note, the next part is to think about how you felt about the interview and decide whether you want to go to school there. And so give the school a 1 out of 10 rating, write down the pros and cons, very important. Actually sit down and talk and go through the pros and cons of each school. That includes both the characteristics of the school itself and the city and the culture of the school and everything else surrounding it, and your personal goals and what you want to be, like where you want to live for 4 years. And and it's kind of be thoughtful about, like, okay, it's very natural. Your first interview, your first couple of interviews, it's very natural to think that it did not, well, it's very natural to think of things that you can improve on, especially early in the interview process as you're gaining experience, and your confidence in your first interview versus like your last interview is going to be so much better. It's going to be so different. So it's important through each step of the way, after each interview, think about what did you do right, what did you do like wrong, and any potential improvements, and also discuss it with your friends. I would kind of talk about like my interview questions with my friends and be like, hey, I had no idea how to answer this. And this was for the traditional interviews where it was just one-on-one. You know, they would offer their perspective. That helped me a lot. And I will say, don't share questions that are very standard through interviews. Like, for example, like an MMI, where you're not like, don't share those questions. But if it's something where it's like a one-on-one conversation, I think it's reasonable to kind of get feedback on how best you can answer this question.
All right, thank you everybody for sharing all of that. That was great. I just want to give all the panelists and Dr. Syed the chance to kind of give you some last minute advice that wasn't covered in the previous slides if they have any. So feel free to give any advice that you have.
So I would just add a couple of things to Sophia's slides and what she talked about, you know, especially the thank you note, the post-interview thank you note. It's very important. And again, you know, if there was something that happened that made it a memorable experience or something that would make it stick out for both you and your interviewer, you should and must definitely include it, because in all fairness, you know, at the end of the day, every person, every interviewer is going to interview probably about 100 to 200 interviews at any given point. I mean, over the period of the interview season. So it's very hard at times to remember, even though we end up, you know, writing things in real time and then discussing them in real time. But later, when the admissions committee meets and the admissions committee is going to talk about, you know, anything that you've said that makes you stand out makes a huge difference. And an interview note is critical in that. I will tell you what not to do with an interview note, though. Email is the best way to do it. I mean, as Sophia said, do not send a thank you card. If you do, that's okay, but let it be a generic, you know, thank you card that doesn't. I've received, our program has received thank you cards that are elaborate, really fancy, and really do not make any sense in the bigger picture when we're really looking, you know, at it. So keep it simple. And keep it relevant as such. The other thing also, just to add to what Sophia said, is yes, your first couple of interviews, you're sort of starting to get the feel of how, what the questions are and how the whole day runs or half a day runs, and you get more comfortable doing that. Traditionally, what ends up happening is it's just like a sort of a bell curve, and as things get started with interviews, the first couple of interviews usually end up being everybody's getting their act together, for lack of a better word, and it's usually in the middle that really people get going, and as most likely, as tired as you guys are at the end of the interview season, the faculty are also tired at the end of the interview season, and it's a reality as such. So so it's that middle period that beginning and the end that you really want to shine, and you really want to really do your homework, and you really want to get ahead from your other. From the other people that are doing the same thing as such. So those are just the two things that I just wanted to add on.
I also have a quick piece of advice. Before your interview, definitely make dua, like that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala picks that program for you if it's the best for you. And when you're ranking your programs near the end of the interview season, do istikhara so that you do rank the medical school is appropriate to what's best for you. You might think that a particular medical school is the best for you, but it might be the case that it's absolutely not. So definitely don't underestimate the power of dua, and ask your mother to, or your parents to make dua for you that same day. You have no idea the difference it'll make. So don't underestimate that aspect, inshallah.
I would definitely second that, yes.
Yeah, and I think my parting advice is to don't go through the process alone. Find some friends that you're applying with that are applying at the same cycle as you, and meet up, at Starbucks or wherever to practice your interview answers. You can do a couple times throughout the cycle. And I say Starbucks because that's something that I did, and I actually look forward to the Starbucks drinks a lot more than I should have. But it's just that's my piece of advice.
Just practice as much as you can in panels amongst friends. Exactly. Nothing will make it more easier than that. Such.
And my last minute piece of advice for you, like we said, just try to be concise and avoid rambling. I've done a couple mock interviews for students, and really just kind of refining your answers, but also not sounding robotic is something that you want to master before your interview. Finding that good middle ground of being prepared but also not rehearsed is great. And as cliche as it sounds, just be yourself. You've had all these experiences throughout undergrad, you've gotten the interview, so obviously your application is good enough to get you that interview and to potentially get accepted. So at that point, it's just knowing who you are as a person, and if you're honestly fun to work with, if you you're professional, you have a sense of humor, you're positive, just all those different things kind of play into having a good interview. And then having the mindset that you're just speaking with a person like yourself. Obviously be professional, but at the end of the day, it's just another human that you're speaking to. And so just be conversational, just have a conversation like it's any other person. And that's kind of advice I would give myself. But yeah, so let me move on.
Let me just add one more thing to that. And depending on what kind of format your interview is happening, and different, obviously several different schools have different ways of doing things. But if you are in a Zoom session and it's either one after the other, some schools and some residencies will actually have you come to a common room, just like this one, and then you get set into a different room with an interviewer. So keep in mind, everybody that you're interacting with is evaluating you. You just have to be aware of that. So the conversation that you have when you're one-on-one with somebody, and the conversation that you have if you are in a session where there are many other faculty or applicants available, everything sort of gets being looked at. and I also say this from a residency perspective also, not only previously when we used to have in-person interviews, my program coordinator would just be sitting there and in between interviews, and she would be listening to the conversation that was going on between the applicants as such. So just keep in mind as to what you're talking about, if there is that kind of format, and just be aware that everybody's, you're being interviewed by everybody that you are going to be in touch with as such point. So be professional all through the way.
That's a very good point. I definitely agree. Okay, so now we're going to open it up to questions. I know there was a few questions that were posted in the chat that we can address, but before we start that, there are 3 different QR codes on the screen. There's the AMWPA website, our YouTube channel where this recording will be posted. And then if you would like to sign up for a mock interview, this is a Google form that you can go to and fill out, and we can get you set up with some interviewers that will be conducting some mock interviews. The first question I got that was sent to me on direct message, which I'll post right now, is I'm currently a freshman at UTD on pre-med track. How do you recommend approaching the clinical hours aspect of medical school application process? What clinics, hospitals do you recommend for us to volunteer or work at?
Since I went to UTD, maybe I can answer this. Children's Hospital Dallas, which is in the same area medical district that UT Southwestern is in, is a very good place to volunteer at. It's not, the commitment isn't too big, so you'll still have time to study and do other extracurriculars. I think it was just like 4 hours every 2 weeks. And doing it over a long period of time and staying with it is a lot, because I'm telling you this specifically because you're a freshman, looks a lot better than maybe getting 500 hours in one summer or 200 hours in like 1 week, or I don't know, it's not even 200 hours in a week, but just definitely keep it like, be consistent with whatever program or volunteering experience that you commit to. Another one is medical scribing. This one is a lot more intensive and it takes a lot more time. Maybe that's something that you could think about during your sophomore year. As a freshman, I think it would be better, at least for the first semester, which I think you're currently in, to focus on how your study schedule is going to look like and just staying on top of your grades, because you don't want to overcommit to a lot of extracurriculars and then let your grades slip. That's a trap that I fell into my freshman year, so I don't want you to fall into it as well.
Yes, that's a great answer. And quick plug, we do have another workshop on extracurriculars, and we talk in depth about different aspects of your application, such as volunteering, work, healthcare hours, and shadowing, and all of that. So feel free to check that out on our YouTube channel as well. But I definitely agree with everything that Mohammad said.
Also, one more thing, a lot of the messages in DFW have a free clinic that you can volunteer at. Epic has one, Irving Masjid has one, Carrollton Masjid has one, Plano Masjid has one. So you could just volunteer at one of them. I think it's just like once a week, every Saturday for like 2 or 3 hours. So that's also something you can look into.
Okay, our next question is, how likely are you to receive an interview if the school offered a secondary?
Sorry, I was gonna, maybe Dr. Syed would be a little bit more knowledgeable about this. I don't know, I just think it's hard to kind of track the process and see what, it just depends.
There's really no good answer to this one. I can, yeah, nobody can tell you like how likely you're going to be offered an interview if it offers a secondary as such. I mean, you know that there's usually secondary applications are submitted. We start interviewing around September, and then as the early applications are submitted and then they're reviewed, then interviews continue all the way through early December, and then sort of January and February as such. So it's I don't have a good answer to this one, sorry.
For some schools like DELL, if you get an secondary from them, that's like a really good sign.
Yeah.
So it depends on the school as well.
Yes, I think it's a good sign that you receive a secondary, just because that means like they want to know more about you. But like all the other panelists said, I don't think there's really a good way of gauging if you'll get an interview or not based on that. Our next question is, do they also ask about international side of the healthcare policy? So I think that's pertaining to the questions that they may ask in the interview in terms of healthcare policies.
I'll take that one. They may, as such, but I think that would be a discussion if you really get involved into the healthcare policy debate, and somebody wants to know what your thought process is and how much you really know about. But majority of the times, it's usually restricted to what happens here in the US, not on the international side of healthcare politics. But if there is something that you can add to your answer with that, and you are well versed with that, you have some kind of experience, or you've actually spent time researching that, absolutely go for it, because it sort of only enhances and projects the breadth of your knowledge about healthcare policies. And if that is really, at a med school level, you may not have an idea yet where you're going to go and what you're going to specialize in. But if you do, and healthcare policy is something that is important to you, you can actually talk about it. But traditionally, we'll probably mostly ask about general healthcare policies and what ends up happening. But if you want to expand on that, and you, like a better word, want to sound really smart, which all of you are, it's a good idea to do that as well.
And our next question is, I'm also a freshman in undergrad at Austin College, and I've already started doing scribing and volunteering, but what's the biggest aspect of my hours or application that I should focus on at the moment? So I can kind of answer this one a little bit. You really want to be holistic with your application. Medical schools are going to look at every single aspect of your application, whether that's community service, volunteering, community service, any work that you were paid for, and then any healthcare activities that you were involved in. And so you want to try to have also research as well. You want to have a little bit of everything. And so you can kind of dictate what you want to do when, depending on your schedule. So if you're taking a gap year, it's kind of different than going straight into medical school, and you balance out the different extracurriculars differently. So you just kind of gauge. For me, I did scribing during my sophomore year and the first part of my junior year. And I chose to do that because scribing during your freshman year is kind of difficult to do when you're starting out college and balancing your schedule. And then I left volunteering and shadowing kind of towards my freshman year when I was still trying to get a balance of things. And then whenever I started studying for the MCAT during junior year, I had to drop my scribing, and I took on a little bit of research roles at my college. And so you just kind of have to gauge, but make sure to be balanced and have a little bit of everything. So it's kind of to your discretion when and how many hours you want to do things. And then our next question is, what's a good question to ask the interviewer?
I think one good one, if you're interested in maybe their public health program or any other dual program, just mention it and start talking about different aspects of that, and ask them for more details about maybe research opportunities or anything, any other like concurrent programs that they have for medical students at that medical school would be a good thing to ask about.
Yeah, when I was interviewing, when I found out who was interviewing me, I looked them up and just see what they do and try to ask them about that.
Yeah, this goes back to prepping for your interview and doing as much due diligence and research about that particular place that you're interviewing at. That'll give you enough sort of material to ask questions for.
Okay, our next question is, I would highly recommend providing mentoring sessions to aspiring students as well. Any thoughts? And so we do have a mentor-mentee program through AMWPA, and you can go and email. I'll put the email in the chat, but if you'd like to be a part of that program, feel free to email that email and we'll get you on that group chat for mentoring. And then which medical undergraduate will be good for medical biology, Bachelor of Science, bioengineering, neuroscience, any of this which are high in demand?
I would love to take this one. So as far as the majors, it doesn't really matter. Med schools don't use what you major in to see how well qualified you are for med school or what you bring to the program. I would major in something that you're genuinely interested in. As well, I would also think about, I think it's solid advice to major in something that can net you opportunities as well in case you decide not to go to med school in your fourth year. There's also, I would also put a plug for a Spanish minor or a Spanish major because that will help you a lot in clinical year. But there is no specific major. A biology degree is not going to, you don't need to major in biology or any science background.
Great. And I think that's all the questions we had in the chat. Does anybody have any other questions? Either post it in the chat or you can feel free to unmute as well. Students who take gap year, will that impact the application and the interview?
As long as you have a good explanation as to what you did in that gap year, it should be fine. Yeah, it shouldn't be a problem.
And somebody said that they'd like to see the QR codes again, so I have just passed my screen shared.
Also, look up and see, what different schools offer, like college and pre-med programs in terms of support and other things. I'm actually going to put UT's link in the chat, and you can look at that and see if that, it talks about college and pre-med programs, summer research programs that you can actually spend time in if you have, and this actually obviously bumps up, your CV, and if this is a school that you really want to be at versus some other school. Every other school will have kind of a similar, not only research programs, but also volunteer programs as such.
Yeah, that's great advice. Any other questions? Okay, let's see. I graduated from my bachelor's in 3 years and I'm doing my master's. Will doing a master's in research help me?
Graduated from my bachelor's in 3 years. I'm doing my master's. Yes, I mean, with the end goal of being, so the question really ends up being, what was the reason from going, doing a master's and research? It will help, absolutely, if that's the track, but just be prepared to sort of answer that as to why, going from your bachelor's, you went to doing a master's and research in the interview process. But yes, absolutely. I mean, if this is research that is relevant to something, that you're really interested in, absolutely, it'll help. There should be no reason in that sense, but just be prepared to answer.
Yeah, and also if you do take a research gap year, they will ask you, why aren't you pursuing an MD PhD instead of a MD program? So you should have a good answer for that and explain why you're only applying for the MD program and not MD PhD, because then they'll start asking you also why you don't just do PhD instead. None of this will stop you. It does help doing a research year, but just prepare to answer those kind of questions at your interview.
We got a follow-up question for that. What is a good answer for answering that question?
Maybe Dr. Syed.
just be genuine. I mean, whatever the real reason for you to do a gap year in research is, you don't never make anything up. And so whatever the genuine reason was for you to do to take that year and do your master's in research, I mean, and everybody has individual reasons why they want to do certain things. Just be prepared with that answer.
Another question we got is, when is the best time to take the MCAT, and any advice on how to prepare? So another quick plug, we do have a workshop on MCAT prep where we go into detail on how to prepare. So feel free to check that out. But in terms of when the best time is to take it, it depends on when you're planning on getting into medical school. So if you don't want to take a gap year, you would take it during your junior year. And then if you're planning on taking a gap year, that kind of pushes it off 1 year. So it just kind of depends on what your plan is. If you want to take a gap year and do research and do all that, if you weren't able to do that during your undergrad years, then it kind of, you know, MCAT's later than usual. Any other questions before we end it? And also, panelists, feel free to input your emails or any contact information that you feel comfortable sharing in case anybody wants to reach out to you for one-on-one advice. All right, thank you everybody for attending this workshop, and thank you so much for the panelists and their time. And feel free to let us know if you have any other questions, and hopefully everybody has a good weekend.
Okay, also, Jazakallah HEBA for moderating.
Yes, of course. Thank you guys for giving your awesome advice.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.